The Dixie Highway was another brainchild of that crazy entrepreneur, Carl Fisher. A lot of the reason was he was developing Miami Beach. He had been down to the city of Miami on the Florida coast and saw this huge swampy area. And in his mind, it was going to be a beautiful resort area geared toward his people like himself and his millionaire friends like James Allison. So he got James Allison, his buddy and partner in Prestolite, a manufacturing company that made early automobile lights. He got him interested in that and some of his other friends. They all were buying property down there, but how to get down there? I mean, really, train travel was about it, and automobile travel was now the new thing, and it was very difficult. So Carl Fisher decided, yes, we want a highway that basically links the Midwest and the South. So he came up with the Dixie Highway, and he started the Dixie Highway Association, he and his friends, in 1914. So they got going in a similar fashion to what they did with the Lincoln Highway, seeking subscriptions and so forth, getting the towns interested in. The Dixie Highway was very different from the Lincoln Highway. It was one destination to another, that is to say, essentially the border of Canada to almost the bottom of the United States. But there were so many different big cities up north that needed to feed into this. It was many fingers at the top, and it all eventually boiled down to one that took them to, gee, where else? Miami Beach. Let's buy some land here, and so on. So it went along with very little, again, much like the Lincoln Highway, very little federal help until about the 1920s, when the federal government began to see, and of course there was a clamor from the public for better roads. So they began to see that they better become involved with highways, and they began to plan cross-country highways, both east-west and north-south. So about 1927, the Dixie Highway Association disbanded because the feds took it over. The Dixie Highway began, well, depends on who you ask. Some people consider that the Dixie Highway began up north in Chicago. Others would say that it started at the top of Michigan. There is, in fact, a marker up in Mackinac City at the top of lower Michigan, and where the Dixie Highway began, that particular iteration of it. Another one began in Detroit. Shows you the many fingers of it. As far as Indiana goes, there are three iterations of it, and they all converge on Indianapolis. One of them is coming down from the northern part of Michigan, essentially following Old 31 for a lot of the way, and coming down and reaching South Bend, all the way down through. Went to Rochester, took a little angle toward the southwest through Logansport and down to Indianapolis. Then it continued on there on Highway 37, what became Highway 37, I should say, and eventually hit what became Highway 150 at Paoli, and then went to Louisville and crossed into Kentucky. However, there's another finger of the Lincoln Highway that comes down from Chicago, and that is Illinois 1 until it hits what is today US 136. That goes through towns like Crawfordsville. That kind of angles into Indianapolis and then again grabs what became State Road 37. And finally, there was an eastern finger of the Dixie Highway that went through Ohio, and the National Road, which is today's US 40, came from there and connected that finger to Indianapolis. So people who lived in Toledo, for example, might come down the Ohio route and cut over to Indianapolis and go down. The Dixie Highway did not have quite the same system as the Lincoln Highway did. There were a lot more extant roads, it seems, but in pieces. So they, as they did with the Lincoln Highway, they looked for extant routes and used the best ones there were. But because the Dixie Highway was not coming from one place to another single place, but rather from several different large cities like Detroit, like Chicago, like Toledo, even Cleveland, there were many, many more options. So that's why there are so many choices up north to get down to Miami. But as you head down, by the time you get into Tennessee, one of the first maps you ever see of the Dixie Highway shows it all comes together at Chattanooga. and then is a single route straight down. Much like with the Lincoln Highway, they did use what existing roads there were, and some of those were still not very good. Down south, you had even more of a mud problem than up here in the Midwest, which is hard to believe sometimes. Once the Lincoln Highway got started and people saw that the concept worked, that there was more backing for it. And then the federal government got into it a lot sooner than they did with the Lincoln Highway. Not a lot at first, but they were contributing money toward paving and widening and various improvements, bridge building and so forth. So it was becoming more improved right along, perhaps more quickly than with the Lincoln Highway. By 1927, when the Dixie Highway Association was disbanded in favor of the federal government taking over these routes, the feds were at this time realizing there was a need for a federal highway system. And much of the Dixie Highway ultimately became US 41, not all of it, because the routes kept changing. The Dixie Highway did not have quite the same legacy as the Lincoln Highway, which was a much easier thing to have an identity because it's one long stream. But the Dixie Highway started out with multiple routes at the top and narrowing down into one. So it has much more of an identity down south than it does in Indiana. However, there are a number of places in Indiana. There's a section just north of South Bend, from South Bend to the Michigan line, not very far, less than 10 miles, that is still called the Dixie Highway to this day. You can still follow most of the Dixie Highway and its different iterations in Indiana. A good place to start would be the Illinois line, and you follow old US 136, which is a highway that's hardly used anymore because the interstate I-74 parallels it, and most people take that. So until you get to the outside area, the outside counties around Indianapolis, you are basically following the old road, and it still looks a great deal like it used to because there just simply hasn't been much need for improvement on it. It's still a two-lane road. As you head down, when you start heading down out of Indianapolis, that's a little bit more of a problem because that has become a large part of the extension of I-69. And they actually used the old State Road 37 right of way, which was the Dixie Highway. So that's really a lot of that is lost. However, again, if you go out of, say, Martinsville, south of Martinsville toward Morgan Monroe State Forest, that is the old Dixie Highway that you're on. It winds around and it's a very beautiful drive, but it's no longer continuous because I-69 closed a lot of those routes off.